Albert Einstein once said, "Women always worry about the things that men forget, while men always worry about the things women remember." In my psychology class senior year, I did extensive study on why we communicate and the differences in the way we express ourselves. And as we grow older and develop our own sense of communication during upper level education and the workforce, it's helpful to understand the differences in communication and how to combat them as we do grow older. And understanding these discrepancies between men and women communication is a very important thing to remember when an issue occurs and you just can't seem to figure out why. So, I'm going to cover three main issues: what these differences are, why we have them, and how to understand them. So, to begin, it's really important to understand these differences between men and women, and there are three major ways that we do differ in communication. So, to begin, I want to touch a little bit on perception and how women and men have very different perceptions of the same conversation. So, Ohio State University explains that women think between the lines while men understand more literal terminology. And I want to go over an example of a conversation that could happen between a man and a woman and the differences in perception of that same conversation. So it starts out by a husband saying, "I'm really tired. I have so much work to do. I don't know how I'm going to get it done." And his wife responds, "Me too. There just aren't enough hours in the day." And his response back was, "There you go again. You never think my contributions to this marriage are good enough." And in this conversation, she's trying to communicate something like, we're partners, we share similar experiences, and her between the line message was that she understands what he's going through and that he's not alone. But he hears her emphasis on competition for status. As if she's saying, "What are you complaining about? You aren't better than I am." And that's why he believes that she's saying his contributions to the marriage aren't any more significant than hers. And that's just a huge issue with perception, why men and women tend to get in arguments when there's completely different perceptions of the same things being said. Another thing I want to touch on is Point Park University uses the example of facial expressions and how women rely heavily on head nodding, eye contact, so these nonverbal cues, while men tend to not smile and disregard these nonverbal cues. And according to the science of people, women are actually better at reading these micro positives or micro negatives. So, cues that show interest or cues that show boredom. And men actually don't consciously use these cues, which can create an issue when a man displays a micro negative on accident, even though he actually is interested. And that kind of ties into paralanguage, which is my third and final cue that isn't equally utilized by men and women. Again, Point Park University found that women use more paralanguage in the form of non-lexical communication. And non-lexical communication is using sounds but not words. So this is when, you're having a conversation, someone's like, mm-hmm, ah, oh, or, using those those verbal cues without using words. And it's actually been found that men are much less likely to use those cues than women, and that can be transcribed to a woman of disinterest. Personally, I do have this issue with my own dad. He never clues that he's listening, so I always have to ask because there is no paralanguage from him. But now that you understand some differences, where do they come from? Why do we have them? So there are actually some social, demographical, and scientific reasons behind it. And I read an article from The Guardian called "What Language Barrier?" and it explains that our brains are actually wired. So more specifically, men are very visual, spatial, mathematical learners, while women excel in verbal tasks. So men prefer actions to get a point across, while women excel using words. And this kind of ties back to that paralanguage discrepancy, since men are more likely to show that they were listening after the conversation rather than during the conversation. And I'm sure you've seen this, a woman says, "Oh, I want this necklace so bad," but she thinks he's not listening, and then come the next holiday, he brings her the necklace and she's like, "So you did listen to me." Another reason why we have discrepancies is because we have different purposes. Point Park University says that men and women were segregated growing up, and that taught them to adopt their own set of purposes in the world, and that has been noted that men actually use communication for power and status, while women use it to connect and seek understanding. And this actually takes me into my third point, which is societal norms and stereotypes. And there's this gender gap that is expected of people, and that most people feel that they need to fit. So Ohio State University explains this as women being responsible for regulating intimacy or how close they let others get to them, while men is more about negotiating hierarchy and who's the captain and who's the crew. And these ideas are actually responsible for issues in the workforce and why many people think, oh, women are better social workers and therapists and nurses, while men are better scientists and electricians. And these norms and expectations make differences in men and women more noticeable because it puts parameters on language. But now that you understand these differences and you know where they come from, it's very important to understand how to overcome these differences. So first, don't believe stereotypes. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this picture. I know I have, but something like this has been engraved into our brain. Women is pink, men is blue, that women should be emotional, sensitive, passive. But those aren't always true. And I know many men in my own life that have great communication skills and many women that don't showcase those. So understanding these stereotypes is a huge step. Another thing is to ask yourself, am I being clear? Why is this point not clear on my end? And, if you take a step back, ask yourself first, chances are the miscommunication can be fixed. Lastly, adapt. Understand that people aren't just going to change, and, adapting to someone is much more dynamic than trying to change them. So it's important to recap in order to, adapt when there is an issue in communication. So developing an understanding of what type of communication differences there are, remembering why we have them, and taking my pointers on how to prevent confrontation. And remember, like Leonardo da Vinci said, the noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding. Thank you for listening to me and the discrepancies between men and women communication.